Welcome to Mentoring Unlocked, hosted by Lindley, founder of Serendipitous Leadership and MentorKey, the platform making mentoring impactful and elevating workplace development conversations. Maud is a renowned executive coach and leadership strategist with over 2 decades of experience, helping leaders unlock their full potential through adaptive leadership and meaningful mentoring. Tune in for personal mentoring stories, expert insights, practical tools, and bold conversations. Whether you're a mentor, mentee, or a culture shaper, there's something for you.
Urs Koenig, welcome. Thank you so much for coming to the Mentoring Unlocked podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome you. We've met several months ago, and I think we are so aligned on so many things, and yet we've had very different backgrounds. And so I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I want to hear your philosophy about leadership and your experiences of mentoring. But before we start with the proper questions, I would love to have a bit of an introduction on your fascinating career so far. Urs, you are a UN former military peacekeeper. You were also a NATO peacekeeping commander. You are an ultra-endurance athlete. You have been an executive coach, a facilitator, a keynote speaker to some of the most prestigious organizations in the world's executive teams. You have written a book on radical humility. There's so much about you that we want to understand, and particularly, how your background has shaped your philosophy of leadership today, and a very unique philosophy, sometimes maybe even controversial philosophy on what good leadership looks like in today's world. So welcome, Urs. Thank you so much for joining us today from Seattle, actually, which is quite a novelty for the Mentoring Unlocked podcast to have a global guest.
That's right. And it's not raining in Seattle, Maud, actually, as I look out the window here. Well, thanks for having me. I loved our time together in Sydney, where you celebrated your anniversary, and I had the pleasure to be on stage, interviewed by you on the panel. I have a very eclectic background, but there is actually one core theme that sort of travels throughout, and that I really am a leadership guy. Like, I've always been drawn to how do you move people towards a common goal, towards something bigger than I can myself achieve on my own? And so that seems through all the different facets of my career that you've mentioned so far. And hopefully there's going to be many more. That's been a recurring theme, the leadership piece. And then, unsurprisingly, because I wrote the book on humble leadership, that is my core expertise. The human side of leadership, yes, the relational side of leadership versus just leading by content expertise. So thanks for having me.
I'm sure that our listeners what will pique our listeners' interest first is this word, NATO peacekeeping commander. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? How did you end up in such a challenging but also incredibly rewarding, impactful position? And what did it look like?
So I have to take a couple of steps back to answer that question. So I'm Swiss, you can tell, from South Texas. I'm from Switzerland, so I have an accent. So in Switzerland, every male Swiss citizen has to go through national service, military service. So yes. I did in my 20s. But then I moved abroad. I lived in Australia for 7 years, where I went to business school with your colleague Pip, and among other things, and then moved to the States, been away from Switzerland for 35 years. So when you're a Swiss abroad, they de-enlist you from the armed forces. But when I turned 50, so I was out of the armed forces for a long time. I turned 50 a few years ago now, and giving my age away here. And I had a good hard look at my life. And I looked back. My dad, who is very important, maybe we'll talk about him a little bit, was very important in my life, passed away recently. I turned 50. And I looked back and asked myself, what are the things I still want to do? And what are the things I don't want to have regrets about not having done it? Mm-hmm. And I originally studied geography many, many years ago because I wanted to get into international development. was what was back then called overseas aid. And I never did do that for a variety of reasons. So now at 50, that's a regret I would have if I were to do it. And so then I started to really look at my options. And I didn't find military peacekeeping at first at all. I looked at Médecins Sans Frontières, actually applied there. I looked at the Red Cross, different NGOs and GOs, both in the States and in Switzerland. And then I found military peacekeeping. And I went, I've been in office for many years ago and, ticked all the boxes. I wanted to make a bit of money. I wanted to have some responsibility. I'm fine to volunteer digging ditches, but not for a full year. So I found peacekeeping. And then I applied after having been out for 22 years. That was the trip, Lord. Like to go back and, yes, sir, and this, madam, and whatnot. And I didn't even know how to dress myself. I did not know how to dress myself anymore. And I was a captain, sort of a mid-ranked officer, had a command. And it was, talking about humility, it was a truly humbling experience to go back into a peacekeeping force, having been out for 22 years. My military knowledge was outdated, but, I brought some other things through my professional career of how you engage with people, how you, get information to and from people through my coaching and facilitation background. So that was helpful. So then I trained for 3 months in Switzerland and I deployed to Kosovo with a small team in 2017 and was part of the NATO peacekeeping force in Kosovo. And then 3 years ago, I was in the Middle East for the UN for a year as well. So, and I actually am on the docket to go back to Kosovo next year, potentially. I have a job if I want it for another 9 months. So at the tender age of almost 60, I might actually be rejoining yet again. So there you go.
I'm just going to stay on this topic a little bit more because I think that it's fascinating to most of our listeners who operate in the corporate world. Can you give us some insights into how you bring your leadership principles, your knowledge about humans to those very challenging and uncertain and predictable environments?
I certainly, and I can tell you how I did that, or I tried to do that. But I also want to say this. Counterintuitively, going back into the military, into what we think of top-down command control, do because I tell you to do so, actually showed me that the best commanders are deeply humble leaders. And in fact, my decision to write my book was catalyzed by the experience I had in those peacekeeping missions. The best commanders I had deep self-awareness. They built psychological safety in their teams. Everybody was free to speak up when the time was, given to speak up. They built meaningful relationships. I will never forget my commander, and I'll tell you then what I tried to do in terms of my experience coming back into the military. My commander sat me down about halfway through the mission after I delivered some very subpar work, and I was called to his office. He sat me down and he literally said, Urs, I love you. I do. And your work is not even close to being good enough. Your work sucks. And I love you. So, and I knew he meant I love you because we've worked together by then for 6 months. So it wasn't just empty words. He cared about me as a professional, as an officer. He cared about me as a person. He knew about my background. He knew about my civilian background, my hopes and dreams for and after the mission. And so he meant it when he said, I love you. And then your work sucks. You need to do better. And I was able to hear that message because I knew he cared. If he would have yelled at me, if he would have chewed me out, I would have just tuned him out, as another high-ranking officer who, whatever. But because, and I talk about tough on results, tender on people, because I knew he cared, he was tender on people, which gave him license to be tough on results with me. And I tell you what, I never, ever wanted to disappoint my commander again after this. And so, and that I didn't. So I really experienced, and of course, there was plenty of officers, to be clear, who did not live that more, human-centered leadership that I advocate for. One thing I did do, Maud, because I came in with limited military knowledge, I knew initially, at least, I needed to lead by relationship versus my content expertise, because I needed to really step it up in terms of my content expertise. I didn't have it, right? And I was very transparent with my team. And I told them, like, I'm going to work my sweet behind off to get up to par. I'm going to work really, really hard, but I'm going to need your help along the way. And because they were younger officers, they knew much more about the current, military environment and knowledge than I did. And so I was vulnerable, hopefully appropriately so, about my weaknesses, my gaps. And I made a point of getting to know each of my team members up front on a personal level. So literally, two of my team members, my deputy commander and my warrant officer, two key positions in my team, were assigned to me at the last minute. First thing I did, take them for lunch. We didn't talk about a job at all. I wanted to know about their hopes and dreams for the mission, what they were potentially concerned about as well, and sort of and talked a little bit about how we got to work together. And so I really tried to I did bring the more relational aspect of leadership, to some extent by necessity, but also because that's what I believe in to those missions, for sure.
Yeah.
That's a long answer to your question, Mona. I hope that's okay.
No, but I can see absolutely the parallels between that military context and the corporate context. And I guess what I'm hearing is the stereotype of command and control type of leadership that people may think we find in the military is actually a stereotype, because like anywhere else, what actually works is empowering leadership that actually cares about people.
We think that because it's by rank that we can just tell people what to do. No. And if you look at special ops teams, they have a whole segue on this, but special operations teams, they show up with vulnerability. They're deeply humble. They tell each other constantly that they love each other. They constantly own their stuff. So the special ops teams are sort of the prime examples of what leadership needs to look like. Simply because it's the military and because we wear uniforms, people don't just do stuff because you tell them to do so.
Yeah, yeah. I guess there's a point where if you've established enough connection with people, and if you've engaged them throughout to be part of the decision, when you make the decision, then the execution and the alignment is there. But I guess the vision that we have of the all-aligned team executing on their commander's orders, that only happens if the prior work has been done of engaging and listening and connecting.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about the other facet of your life, which is the corporate world. And I want to obviously talk about mentoring and the place that mentoring has, or the role that mentoring has played in your career. Can you share with us who the critical mentors or guides have been throughout your career?
I'm coming back to my father, who I
Yes.
write extensively in my book. So my dad really was a huge influence in all aspects of my life, including in terms of my leadership. And there's a lot of things, he lived this tough on results, tender on people in his parenting with us. And so I will never forget, I was a member of the Scouts, and he told me, you can go to the Scouts, but we're not going to drive you. You have to ride your own bike. So I remember coming back from a scouting weekend. I was really tired and pushing my bike up the hill. And my dad, rode his bike towards me and sort of said, I want to see how the weekend was. And so he wanted to ride home with me together. So we pushed the bike up the hill together, and he inquired about the weekend. He was a very avid outdoors man as well, and wanted to know all about my scouting weekend. So he was tender on people by, coming to meet me and truly caring about what my experience was like. And then he said, Urs, you forgot something at home. You forgot something. A scout does not forget anything ever. I had no idea what he meant, but I forgot my first aid kit. And his words was, weak, very weak, Urs, not cool. So again, sort of tender on people, coming to meet me, caring as a father, and then being able to deliver that tough message, but that's not good enough. So that's one thing. Another aspect my dad was incredibly good at, and which I believe I'm decent at as well, is actually having the self-awareness and assess his career every 3 to 5 years in an honest way, and then actually make the change when things don't feel right anymore. And you and I know so many people who are prisoners of their prestige, of their status, of their money, and they can't stand their jobs. And my dad was incredibly good. He even demoted himself a couple of times during the course of his career because he was not happy where he was. So my dad was a hugely important mentor. I also had a very negative mentor, sort of the reverse.
Which often is as formative as the good mentors.
Exactly. So that was the commander of the officers' school. And I was 21. And he was a raging alcoholic, but then he preached to us about self-discipline. And I will never forget, there was this one incident where I did something wrong and he chewed me out and I could smell his breath from like 3 meters away. And I held it together for a little while, but he went on and I started to laugh. You do not laugh at your commanding officer when he chews you out. You do not. So I almost got kicked out of officer school. In fact, the next morning, everybody, Koenig, what did you say? He's furious, whatever. And so it sort of instilled in me, it's a very simple concept. Of course, we all know, like leading by example, right? You got to be able to do what you're asking of people to do. And so that was a formative sort of negative experience. And that, in terms of, I was thinking about this because I knew you would ask me about mentors. I actually think of my executive coaching clients over the years. Like they actually taught me a lot, and they pay me, right? So it's sort of, but as you know, I learned so much from my executive coaching clients, not the least that in fact, with the right process, with the right mindset, with the right accountability, true change actually is possible. It's hard, it's difficult, but it's really possible. So I have, a handful of executive coaching clients that really inspired me and sort of reverse mentored me. One stands out to me actually. So we worked on, he was a sort of, I'm simplifying it a little bit. He was a bit of a bully, and we worked on being less of a bully. And the biggest compliment I ever received over the course of my coaching career was his wife calling me and thanking me for the work. That's right. For the work.
It was not
because
just
it showed
work.
up at home as well. Exactly. It showed up at home as well. So he stands out as one of the clients who really started to develop that self-awareness, was willing to dig deep and sort of reverse mentored me, I guess.
Yeah, I was about to, I had it on the tip of my tongue, that reverse mentoring, which is very real. And often I ask mentors, what do you take away from that mentoring experience? And some people actually are almost embarrassed to say, "Oh, I've gotten so much out of this. I hope my mentee got as much." But of course, when the mentee gets something out of it, the mentor also grows. And so that is absolutely the principle of reverse mentoring applies to any mentoring conversations. Also, I want to come back to something that you've mentioned before, which was about that principle of leading by example, and I want to connect this to this concept of vulnerability, because I think that one of the reasons you didn't respect that commander is because that sense of self-awareness, so that sense of self authenticity and that readiness to look into yourself wasn't there. Tell me more about how leaders can apply this. How do you bring that level of humility and vulnerability that is actually infectious and encourages others to also sort of introspect, to grow, which I think is at the heart of your principles in leadership.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's funny. I was writing a white paper until like half an hour ago, titled "From Show of Force to Show of Vulnerability."
Yes.
Lessons from peacekeeping and how to build trust. And so, look, vulnerability, of course, there's many people, Brené Brown, of course, popularized it first. There's plenty of people who talk about it. And I want to be very clear, we need to also be careful with vulnerability. We need to, in peacekeeping, when you take your helmet off, you put your weapon away, and you walk unarmed into a village, you need to have thought about the potential safety repercussions to you and your team. So it needs to be a calculated risk. And the same, applies in the civilian environment, in business as well. I do think as a society, we're way too far on the hero leader side, protect the perfect facade, and not enough on the vulnerability side. I only have to look across the lake here to Microsoft, Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, who of course, really embodies that principle of those principles of vulnerability, humility, and the growth mindset. So there's definitely examples in the corporate world. So the way I think about this is, first of all, vulnerability always in 3 acts. The first act is me. The second act is maybe a weakness, a goal. That's, by the way, a very appropriate way to show up with a bit of vulnerability, is to communicate a meaningful personal goal. Because it demonstrates to my team members that I'm too work in progress. So I don't need to, bury my soul open and tell you about my deepest fear. No, that's not what we're talking about. It's communicating. I want to get better at delegating. I want to become a better listener, whatever it might be. So a goal. And then the third act is, what am I doing about it? So don't just stop at, this is my weakness, and that's it. Like, what am I thinking I'm going to do to make it better? So in 3 acts. And then there's plenty of research showing that vulnerability is actually the quickest way to build trust. People often think of trust first, vulnerability second. In fact, it's the other way around. There's a fascinating study, maybe you've heard about it, which brought pairs of complete strangers into a lab and asked them to ask and respond to meaningful questions, such as, what does love and friendship mean to you? Or if you only had 1 year to live, what would you change? When the complete strangers, at the end of those 45 minutes, they asked the participants to rate the level of trust they developed with that stranger of 45 minutes. And they rated the level of trust about as high as the level of trust they have with the average person in their life. Some even rated it as high as the trust they have with their significant other. And one pair, I love this, one pair even got married. But the point of this whole experiment is that even brief periods of meaningful and appropriate vulnerability and sharing can actually develop trust really fast. There's examples in healthcare where doctors turn the pre-ops checklist procedure into a meaningful experience and build trust simply by doing it with different body language, with eye contact versus just rushing through it. So it's a hugely important piece. I'd like, in my keynotes, I talk about this. Everybody admires perfection from a distance, and nobody can relate to it, right? And Brené Brown famously said, vulnerability is the very last thing I want to show you, Maud. It's the last thing, but it's the first thing I look for in you. So, this is what we call the vulnerability loop. So I open up a little bit, you pick up on that, you do the same, backwards and forwards, and so we can deepen our relationship. And again, I want to be very clear. This is not about talking about my deepest fears with my work colleagues at all. That's not about that.
It's about growth.
It's about growth.
Yeah. I love the arc here that you're sharing with us. It's actually, in order to create an effective leadership impact, you have to develop that trust. You have to develop that connection. And in order to do this, as a leader, you want to share vulnerability, but I really love the way you've described it. It's about sharing something that you're working on, a personal goal that is in progress, and sharing, I guess, why it's important to you, what you're looking to achieve, and then what you're doing about it, and perhaps sharing, I imagine, some of the setbacks you've had and some of the learnings. When it does that, and the research shows that boosts the trust between two individuals in ways that even a lifetime relationships don't equate. So that's a very practical and simple, I guess, call out for leaders. If you build that trust with your people, you can then have the difficult conversations about results and about outputs, which I think is really, from my experience in working with leaders today, in today's world, that is incredibly difficult for leaders to manage both high performance in their people and at the same time creating a purposeful, engaging, psychologically safe environment. Sometimes leaders see those two things as almost contradictory, counterintuitive. So you're bringing those two things together very, very nicely. Urs, thank you. Thank you so much for that wisdom.
Can I share one anecdote quickly?
I want you to. I'd love you to.
So there is. One of the stories or anecdotes I love is from Brad Smith. He's the former CEO of the financial technology company Intuit. So he volunteered to his board to do a 360.
Uh-huh.
He volunteered. He wasn't told, and then he shared his 360 report, his strengths, weaknesses, and the third act. Remember the action steps, what he's going to do differently. Yes. With the entire company. He emailed his 360 report to every single person in the company. He even taped a copy to his office door for everybody to see. Now, that is vulnerability in action. And he built humongous trust across all the organization because of his ability to, with appropriate vulnerability, share that he is too, work in progress. And then if I'm at Intuit, I'm going, the top dog admits that he's not perfect and wants to get better. I can do the same thing. And so that's exactly what I'm talking about here.
Yeah, absolutely. As Brene Brown would put it, it takes courage to be vulnerable. Do you think that leaders today still see this as overwhelming? That sense of that there's a requirement for them to be vulnerable in your work as a coach, as a mentor. How challenging, difficult, easy is it for you to help your mentees and your clients to develop that capacity for vulnerability with their people?
It's work in progress. But look, I think it's still an uphill battle. I don't know what your experience is. And it's also, I hate to say it, I do experience, I don't have clean data on this. There's a gender difference too. And so I still perceive male leaders as having more challenges to show up with appropriate vulnerability. So it's an uphill battle. So what I'm trying to do with my clients is, doing what we're doing now, sort of, let's pick it up sort of intellectually and let's look at the research, let's look at the models, and then actually practice it. And actually, I do things like role plays and very practically practice showing up with appropriate vulnerability. But it's not easy. It's not straightforward. I think teaching somebody to delegate is easier.
Yes. I'm picking up on this gender, difference that you're seeing. Do you think it's the societal expectations that shape people's ability to be more vulnerable than others? Is it that they feel that it will be better received? Or is it education?
Honestly, with all humility, I'm not sure. I've actually been challenged on this whole notion of vulnerability. Yeah. Sorry, I'm changing the subject for a second, or the angle a little bit. Early on, after I published my book, I was on a podcast with an African-American former female executive.
Yeah.
And she said, this is all nice and dandy. Let me tell you, I'm always in the minority. I'm the only woman in the room. I'm the only Black person in the room. For me to show up with vulnerability, they would have kicked me right out the back door. So, and that, I really took that to heart. I said, you know what? It's easy for me as an old white guy to preach about about vulnerability.
Yes.
And so I really, by the way, that again, hopefully I'm displaying a little bit of my own message here. I did not address enough in the book. If I would rewrite the book now, I would actually address that more. If we're part of a minority, then we actually might have to earn our right to show up with vulnerability with some strong deliverables. I'm not saying that's right, but I think that's the reality, and that's what I was told. And so that's definitely an aspect that we need to consider the background of someone.
I think you're totally answering the question by, you said, I'm just going to sidetrack, but it's actually absolutely answering the question. Is we've talked about the necessity for leaders to show that vulnerability to deliver trust. But sometimes intuitively, and rightly so, leaders may feel that by displaying that vulnerability, the culture around them is not ready yet to see them display that sense of humility, because I'm going to use those two words almost interchangeably, right? It is about being humble in being open. That's what we mean by vulnerability. And sometimes the context, the cultural context of an organization or a situation does not rate that sense of humility as highly as we would like it to be. I mean, obviously, you and I are culture shapers. We want to create cultures that shape the ability for leaders to be humble and vulnerable. But sometimes leaders know intuitively that it's not the right moment. How do you address this in your capacity as a mentor or as a coach? Let's actually, if I think about the listeners to the podcast, most of them are mentors looking to sharpen their approach to supporting emerging leaders. How do we help someone not only just digging deep and thinking about that sense of humility and vulnerability for themselves, but navigating a world that may not be yet appreciating the strength and the importance of those qualities?
Yeah. Well, so I think first of all, like acknowledging exactly that, right? So I think that's where it starts. And then, and I'm borrowing this from Amy Edmondson, actually. So the organization might not be ready for you as, a director, as a VP or senior VP, to show up with your peers or your boss with that humility or vulnerability. But you have much more control over your own team than you might actually think. So we can build our own, Amy calls this, pocket of humble leadership excellence. So you, instead of looking sideways and up and throwing up your hands, and might have actually talked about this on stage with you back in October, and saying, there's nothing I can do here, this culture is terrible, look down. Teach yourself to look down into your world where you actually have control and you can build your own pocket of leadership excellence, however this looks for you, humility, vulnerability, whatever it is, and build it there. And who knows, it doesn't happen always, but it's possible that it spreads. People go, in Mott's team, they actually are listened to. Like they actually can bring their input to the table, and they might actually get promoted away because they're so good. So this is the best case, of course. So people start to line up to work for you. So again, I think focusing less on all the stuff that I seemingly can't control, but instead focusing on what I can control, which is my team. I can totally drive the culture of my team.
And I imagine the relationship that I form as well, whether they're in your team or not, the relationship that you shape throughout the organization, you've got control over that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Now, coming back to the people who you have found perhaps more challenging in taking there, give us some insights if we have mentors listening to us and thinking, yes, that's what my mentee needs to develop, but how do I get them there? How do I help someone acknowledge that those vulnerabilities? How do I help them even uncover that sense of authenticity, which doesn't come naturally to everyone?
So the first thing I'm going to say is I'm sure it's controversial, but unless you love people, don't try to be a leader. Yeah. Don't be a leader. You must love people. And I know that's a strong statement. That doesn't mean that you need to be an extrovert. Not at all. Great leaders, Jim Collins' research way back showed that introverts can be great leaders. But we must fundamentally love people. We must enjoy other people's success. We must take pleasure in engaging with other people. And by the way, if you don't love people, there's nothing wrong with you. You're a great IC. And, you and I know there's not enough career paths for outstanding individual contributors, but not everybody should or must be a leader. And so, and I know this is not, I'm coming in with a sledgehammer here. So, but I would actually, as a mentor, look at that. Is the person really loving people? Do they want to be, and do they have what it takes to be a leader? And then if yes, I would then start very personally. How do you build relationships in your personal life with your family members? Like, that's where it starts. It's the same principle. It starts with a conversation. How do you build relationships with your neighbors in your community? And why is that different from work? It's not. So I would bring it back sort of to the first principles of how we engage in our personal lives. So these are the sort of two approaches I would take.
I'm going to push it even further, Urs, because I'm really interested in that comment you made. Don't be a leader if you don't love people. And that reminds me of, I think it was Marcus Buckingham who, it makes me laugh because, some leaders challenged him when he said, you have to meet with your team members at least once a week and have a deep and meaningful conversation with them. And some leaders said, I don't have time. And he responded, that's fine, then don't be a leader. That's okay, but don't pretend to be a leader. What defines for you someone who, because I know some people who wouldn't be able to tell you, do I love people? I don't know. What constitutes loving people? What's the definition for you of someone who loves people?
I think what I mentioned before, this fundamental pleasure I take out of helping you succeed, helping you go to your potential and above. Sort of so the love is displayed by my pleasure of your success, I guess. And so that, I think, is a really important element. I do then think, though, and that this really breaks it down to first principles. I mean, if I'm constantly uncomfortable in my one-on-ones and I don't want to be here, that probably is a sign too, right? I mean, it's literally picking up, not to go too woo-woo, but what's my energy? What's my body telling me while I'm engaging with others? And again, there's nothing wrong. There's plenty of wonderful people who do their best work, by themselves or in very, very small, with very, very little interactivity. Actually, sorry, I'm coming back to the one-on-one. I think I listened to one of his podcasts on HBR as well, and where he talks to I think the research says every 10 days you should have a one-on-one, so make it easy, it's every week. That's actually one of the things I did in my peacekeeping mission from the very beginning, and my team was blown away. Oh my God, I've never had this, not in my civilian life, not in my military career, never. And you and I know, this is a whole separate conversation, how valuable those one-on-ones are, because you can prevent a lot of even team dynamics and stuff that's going sideways in those one-on-ones. So.
Yeah. I really want to underscore what you have said there. To be a leader, you've got to love people. What does that mean to love people? It's to take pleasure out of seeing them grow or having an impact and helping them grow, I guess. That is a simple question. Do you take pleasure in seeing people grow? And if you think yes, then there is a lot to invest in. So many insights already. I want to zoom out, I guess, zoom back out as we close. And I want to ask you, we've talked about fundamental characteristics of successful leadership in today's world and how, as mentors and coaches, we can ignite those fundamental principles. But I want to zoom out and ask, what makes, I guess, those particular characteristics of, needing to develop trust, being radical in your feedback, demonstrating love, creating that humility and vulnerability. Why is this so important in today's world's leadership? Did it always used to be the case? Like, if you think back 20 years ago, was it as prevalent as it is today? And why is it so important today that leadership is shaped in that way?
Of course, there were always leaders who were, even 150, 200 years ago who subscribed more to our, you're my model of leadership. But I do think it's becoming increasingly important. And I mean, the simplest way to talk about this is, leading in today's world is by definition humbling. Like nobody can claim they know all the answers, And so tell me how AI exactly is going to impact your business. If you think you know, like you're full of, what, right? So it's by definition humbling. No one person can know it all or do it all. And it's in a way, it's almost freeing as well, like on a at least intellectual level, because I don't need to figure it out all on my own. So I need a strong team to get it done with. And so I think that's where it starts. And the more, I don't have to talk about the VUCA world, and we all know that that's, faster moving, more complex. The more that's the case, the more important this humility becomes, the more important the human connection becomes as well. Not the least because the workforce demands it too. I mean, if you look at the research, the youngsters today, yes, they want to make money, of course, but they want to have meaning and purpose, and they want to be seen and heard as whole human beings, much more so than our grandparents did, my parents did in the work. So I think it's the external environment, it's the workforce that's demanding it as well. And then, I'm not an AI expert, but something tells me that it's going to be a while until, I know we have, chat boxes that provide counseling and coaching, but it's going to be a while until I have that true sense of connection with an AI language model that I feel with another human being. I might be wrong, but that's my guess. So that's hard to replace.
Yeah, I think those 3 points are incredibly powerful. It was the complexity of the world, the different expectations of the new generations coming to work, but also simply how humans can continue to be unique and deliver what only they can deliver in the world of artificial intelligence. So that's very powerful. I'm afraid we're already at time for our podcast, even though I would love to talk to you for another hour and a half or more. So we're going to finish with just one last question for you, Urs. For our listeners who are mentors and leaders, what is your key recommendation for them in this current world as they try to develop their mentoring skills, but also their leadership skills?
Oh, one key. Oh my God, you're making it hard. So I'm going to make this super simple and practical, actually. Get into the habit of asking your mentee, and as a leader, your team member, on a regular basis for feedback on what you're doing as a mentor or what you're doing as a leader is working for them and what is not working for them.
Yeah.
Not every 6 months, but every single time. At the end of the conversation, what can I do better? What do I do well? Sort of a very simple and practical way, and yet very few people do it because why? We're afraid of the answers. That's why we don't ask for feedback. So get into the habit of asking that for that feedback regularly. That would be my very simple guideline.
Well, that's a very simple and yet powerful one, because when you ask for feedback, you develop your self-awareness, your personal awareness, which in itself is a very humbling, a humbling act. Urs Koenig, thank you so much for being with me today. I thoroughly enjoyed your insights. I'm sure your listeners, our listeners will as well. And wishing you the rest of your day to be as insightful as the morning you've provided me. Thank you so much, Urs, and see you soon.
Thanks a lot for having us. Great.
Thanks for listening to Mentoring Unlocked. This podcast is powered by MentorKey, the platform designed to make mentoring impactful. If this episode unlocked inspiration within you, please follow, share, or leave us a review.